I'm Alexia Russell, and today on The Detail, New Zealand's slow-moving trade negotiations with India and a complication on the horizon that's already scuppered diplomatic relations between India and Canada.
India and Canada have expelled each other's top envoys along with other diplomats. It comes after Justin Trudeau's government accused India's ambassador and other agents of homicide and other acts on Canadian soil.
You know, India is definitely not holding its breath for New Zealand. It's being hotly courted by many other countries. It's everyone's next big opportunity.
It used to be said that New Zealand's ties with India revolved around cricket, the Commonwealth and curry. Now that our Prime Minister's in a hurry to do a trade deal, it's all about immigration and business relationships.
The story of India has been, it's going to be the third largest economy by the end of this decade. It's already the most populous country on earth. New Zealand has a neutral relationship, but actually we want to move it forward in a very positive direction.
Those connections are being made, slowly.
Yeah, a lovely little event run by the India-New Zealand Business Council where they'd brought the Indian High Commissioner down, Nita Bhushan, to have a chat about the trade relationship between New Zealand and India.
Newsroom's National Affairs editor, Sam Sachdeva, was at an event in Christchurch celebrating new links in the tech world where the Indian High Commissioner spoke.
It was good to go along and hear what she had to say, and I thought it was, quite revealing in a few respects, actually.
Revealing in what kind of respects?
Well, I guess placing further doubt on any prospect of a free trade deal being done this term, which is the government's goal. Christopher Luxon made that perhaps ill-advised pre-election commitment that he'd get a deal signed in his first term. And look, I wouldn't want to overstate it. The High Commissioner was quite positive about the relationship, said, yes, things have definitely elevated. We're closer than we have been in a long time. But she sort of said, look, let's take some steps, small steps. You can't just jump ahead. So I sort of viewed that as an implicit reminder that, you can't rush this. And I don't think the Indian government feels that they want to rush it either.
I would assume in any trade deal you can't rush things. Culturally you have to sort things out. There have to be lots of discussions and then, take that back to your primary producers and all the rest of it. But in the Indian situation, is it particularly important that those friendships need to be built first?
Yes, I think that's exactly right. What she said was that Indians believe in long-term relationships and not brief partnerships, that it's not about purely transactional value. There needs to be that connection and relationship first, so it seems more pronounced there. I think you're right that that's the case for any FTA, and in fairness, the Trade Minister, Todd McClay, has said previously to me, and I think to others, we're not going to rush this. We're not going to just sign any deal for the sake of signing it.
Here's Todd McClay speaking to Jack Tame back in May.
Is your government on track, as the Prime Minister promised during the election campaign, to deliver a free trade deal with India this term?
Well, we're working very, very hard at that. What we realise and we said is one of the first things we have to do is invest in the relationship. We think it has been underdone for a number of years. I was up there very quickly before Christmas. Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters has visited. Prime Minister will be visiting later in the year with the trade mission.
Will the deal be done this term?
We're going to work as hard as we can to do that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but will the deal be done this term?
Well, I was going to say we're going to work very hard to do that, of course, and that is the commitment that we've made.
But I think particularly on the Indian side, given those attitudes that Nita Bhushan highlighted, as well as some of the sensitive areas in negotiations, which is dairy on the Indian side and migration or labour mobility on the New Zealand side, it's actually going to take a lot of time to arrive at an outcome that's going to suit both sides, if that's even possible.
Do you think, in the interests of Luxon proving that his election promise was not one made in haste or made in vain, that we would settle for a less than satisfactory trade deal?
I would suspect not. I wouldn't rule it out. Or it may be some sort of middle ground where, maybe the full deal isn't signed, but there's some sort of, I think, early harvest agreement, which was the case with India and Australia, where it was sort of like, here's a interim agreement or announcement. We're going to work together on these areas and we're going to develop further areas in time. So that's that's possible, but it's not only going to be whether or not the government is comfortable with it. Business is going to be looking at this very closely. I think Fonterra has said previously that they wouldn't be happy if there was a free trade deal with India that had no access or no meaningful access for dairy. So there'll be a bit of pressure coming on from the agriculture sector as well, I think, not to just push something across the line and put pen on paper just so you can say, hey, look, we've done what we said we were going to do.
There's another potential stumbling block, one that most Kiwis won't know anything about, but it's definitely on the radar for the 300,000 strong Indian population here.
Their demand is a free country for the Sikhs, which they call Khalistan. So this has been the demand for over half a decade in India. And now it has vanished from India, but the overseas diaspora is still going on with this demand.
A group labelled by India as terrorists, which is drumming up support around the world for an independent Sikh homeland. The president of Sikhs for Justice was in New Zealand last month, rallying thousands of Kiwi Sikhs for what the group calls a referendum on the issue. The police have been praised for helping defuse the situation, but the Hindu community wants to know why a man known for sowing discord was allowed in. And there's a warning. If the government doesn't keep an eye on this development, we risk a diplomatic rift like the one between India and Canada. And there goes our trade deal. To help me paint a picture is RNZ Asia journalist Gaurav Sharma. We're going to run through the history of this movement and have a look at what went on in Canada, and then go back to Sam to take the temperature of our potential trade deal. But first I asked Gaurav what the big gatherings of New Zealand Sikhs featuring the yellow flags of a country that doesn't exist were all about.
It was not a protest, so to say. It was a non-official, non-binding within quotes, referendum. So a US-based organization called Sikhs for Justice. So they are organizing these referendums. They have organized this in few cities in UK, Canada, Australia. And they are doing these non-binding, non-official referendums in those cities where they think there is good enough Sikh diaspora.
Some of the referendums in Australia have been violent.
2 men have been injured in a violent brawl at Federation Square after tensions flared between opposing protesters from the Indian community. Police were forced to use capsicum spray to break up the clash as members of the public watched in fear.
Flags became weapons, a brutal bashing on Swanston Street as police tried to control the pro-Sikh and pro-Indian protesters.
This issue goes back to 1947.
So India was partitioned in 1947 and we got India and Pakistan. And then India was a union of states. So India, there were like 550 different provinces. They got all together and formed the Republic of India. So if you look at Indian Constitution, it is called a union of states. India is a union of states.
Right.
So Punjab is also one of those states.
So Sikhs belong to Punjab?
Yes, majorly. They are spread throughout India, but yeah, the majority population lives in Punjab. And Punjab was actually divided into India and Pakistan as well. So around 2/3.
So it was split?
Split, yeah. So
Okay.
2/3 went to Pakistan and around 1/3 of the land area stayed with India.
And now those Sikhs want their own country?
Not now. This demand actually gained traction in 1970s, in 80s. And there was a violent insurgency in India in the Indian state of Punjab for around 15 years, from 1980s till the mid-1990s.
In 1982, Sikh religious leader Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale started the Khalistan movement, which soon became armed militancy. It culminated in the 1984 storming of Sikhism's holiest shrine, the Golden Temple in Amritsar, by the Indian Army, after Bhindranwale and other militants took refuge there to avoid arrest. The raid resulted in hundreds of deaths, including Bhindranwale's, and outraged millions of Sikhs around the world. A few months later, then Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was assassinated by 2 Sikh bodyguards.
The trauma the diaspora that still faces is those days, what happened in 1980s, in 90s, and lots of people went outside of India as refugees. Some came to New Zealand as well, but to Canada, to UK, to US. And they still foster their dream that Khalistan can be a reality one day.
Indian governments then and now label the movement terrorism. Protests inside India died out and there was mass Sikh immigration.
So lots of Sikhs left India out of the crackdown.
New Zealand has a big Sikh population.
Yes.
Do you know what the levels are? How many people?
So the census data 2023, they say around 50,000 people of Sikh religion, they speak Punjabi. So you can say
Wow.
50, 55, 60,000 people.
That's a lot. How does that compare to the general Indian population?
It's around 300,000. So Indian population is 300,000.
So it's about a sixth.
No, 1/6 of
Yeah,
population.
quite a decent size.
Yeah, decent size.
Recently, a move by the Indian government ignited the separatist movement again.
Then in 2020, when Indian farmers, many Sikhs, protested in New Delhi against the Modi government's moves to reduce government subsidies.
I think the farmers' protests were for all Indian farmers, not just the Sikh farmers, but the Sikhs have sort of the limelight.
There was a farm bill that Modi government introduced in 2020, just before COVID, and it's widely commentators believe that has helped this movement gain some traction in India.
Explain to me the connection with farm bills.
Farm bills is so Indian agriculture sector is very depressed. There is lots of stress. The farm suicide is a very common thing there. So Indian government wanted to introduce lots of reforms in the agriculture sector. But because there was not much discussion then that went into introducing those reforms, lots of farmers from Punjab, because Punjab is an agriculture state, Sikh farmers. So they protested. And there was a crackdown from the Indian government, and lots of Indian government and the ruling party people started calling those farmers Khalistanis. And because of that crackdown, this movement, which was basically outside India, started getting some local support. So that's what happened. But the farmers didn't budge. And after 1 year, the Indian government realized its mistake and rolled back the farm laws. So now the farm laws are not in place. There are no reforms in Indian agriculture sector. But because they were blaming and labeling everyone who was protesting the farm bills as Khalistanis, now local youth started, okay, you call us Khalistanis, we'll be Khalistanis.
So ironically, the Indian government has made its bed of nails and is now lying on it.
And I think they realize their mistake now. And that's why after 1 year, they rolled back the farm laws. So hopefully things will turn a corner now.
In the meantime, the US-based Sikhs for Justice group is gaining momentum, staging these referendums around the world. Its leader, Avtar Singh Panun, was here from September, mobilising support. Political experts, including Victoria University's David Cappy from the Centre for Strategic Studies, warned his presence could damage New Zealand-India relations, with both New Delhi and Wellington keeping an eye on developments.
For a month or so, his people mobilized throughout New Zealand support for the referendum. So obviously it's a very divisive issue. We have seen what have happened in Australia. So the Indian community, the larger Indian community, petitioned the government, lots of Indian associations who have been in place since 1920s. So they have also petitioned the New Zealand government, wrote to the ministers, to the police, that this should not happen because it's sowing the seeds of divisiveness within the Indian community, as was the case in Australia.
Thousands of people had come out to vote in the Khalistan referendum, a non-binding and non-governmental vote to create an independent Sikh state.
The problem is the way the forces they use to suppress this movement and the voice of the Sikhs.
But the government didn't think that's appropriate, so they let the referendum happen.
So was the New Zealand government's attitude, this is nothing to do with us, people should be allowed their free expression? Or would you think they were not aware of the political minutiae of the situation?
I don't know whether it is naivety or it's collusions, because we have seen what happened in Australia. So when they talk about the Sikh separate country, lots of hate speeches are given in against the Hindu community. So the issue somehow becomes a divisive issue between the Sikh and the Hindu community. So obviously the Hindu community doesn't like it. So we have seen these violent clashes in Canada, for example. In Australia, they did the same referendum, so-called referendums, in Sydney, in Melbourne, in Brisbane.
It was fierce. I mean, there was a graffiti on temples and that kind of thing.
Yeah, obviously. So graffiti on temples, in gurdwaras. Gurdwara is basically the Sikh temple. So Hindu temples were facing the same thing. The Sikh temples were facing the same thing. And the New South Wales police doesn't know who actually was instigating all that. So we had those examples. And to be fair to New Zealand police, we asked them, do you know that, this is a divisive issue and it can sow seeds of discord within the community, and can you assure the public that everything will be peaceful? So New Zealand police did say that to us, that they know that it's a divisive issue and we'll take care that everything works smoothly and safely for the wider public, and it did.
So you think the police are aware of these things?
Yes, they acknowledged us to us on record that they are aware of this. Yeah.
More possibly aware than the government is.
Yeah, so the government told us that, they had nothing to do with it. It's a freedom of expression, the rights and everything. Lots of, Indian ethnic community newspapers wrote about this, that we have examples. In 2018, Phil Goff cancelled all the venues for some far-right commentators who wanted to come here from Canada. Just, I think, in the last week.
Lawrence Sutherland.
Yes, Lawrence Sutherland. And so we have seen what happens with Owens, right?
Right-wing commentator Candace Owens, accused by her detractors of promoting conspiracy theories and anti-Semitism, was refused entry to Australia. And on that basis, New Zealand followed suit.
Australia's Immigration Minister Tony Burke said the country's national interest would be best served with Owens somewhere else, as she could, and I quote, incite discord in almost every direction.
Gurav draws a parallel between Owens and Avdar Singh Panun, also accused of sowing the seeds of discord. There's disquiet about that in the Hindu community and fear of a backlash from India.
When we talked to the academics, they told us, like David Kepi, who is the director of Centre for Strategic Studies in Victoria University, he told us that if somehow Indian government feels that there is some official blessing within quotes to this referendum, then India will mind it. Now it's up to India to understand whether there was some official blessing or not. We can't say that. We can just speculate.
You talked about Canada. Tell us what's happened there.
So Canada, it's very, there are allegations and counter-allegations. Canadian government alleges that Indian government agents, the Secret Service of India, they assassinated a separatist leader in Canada who was a Canadian citizen. Indian government alleges that there is a organized crime racket that goes on, and it's just a gang war that is happening. And the Canadian government gives them official blessing, the Khalistani separatists. So it's counter allegations.
India and Canada are caught up in a tense diplomatic showdown over the assassination of a Sikh separatist leader in British Columbia. Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a naturalized Canadian citizen originally from the northern Indian state of Punjab, was an advocate for an independent Sikh homeland. He was killed by masked men outside a Sikh temple in the city of Surrey, southeast of Vancouver, in June. He'd been designated a terrorist by Indian authorities. This week, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that Canadian authorities have, quote, credible information linking the killing to India's government. Both countries have now expelled top diplomats.
And now, I think the relationships between India and Canada are at a lowest level ever.
Pretty tense.
Pretty tense. They have, there has been expulsion of diplomats, and wherever Indian high commissioners or Indian consulates are doing any, camps or something, then there are protests. And now, I think, to top it all, Canadian government has accused the Indian Home Minister, that he's behind all these assassinations and all. So it's pretty murky what is happening between those. I don't see. Some commentators have said that it's even worse than the relationship between India and Pakistan, the relationship between India and Canada right now.
Do you worry that the deterioration of relationships, such as we've seen between India and Canada, could happen here in New Zealand if this kind of referendum activity was allowed to get out of hand?
There is a possibility, definite possibility. I think New Zealand needs to understand that, like in India, there is cross-party support to it. Support to what? To crack down the Khalistan separatist movement.
In March, our Foreign Minister Winston Peters waded into the India-Canada dispute while on a visit to India.
Winston Peters reportedly saying, "Where's the evidence?" questioning Five Eyes intelligence out of Canada, which allegedly ties the killing of a Sikh leader in Vancouver last year to the Indian government.
There's already been a bit of pressure on New Zealand to have a stance. Winston Peters, when he was there earlier this year, made some comments in relation to the case that were then reported by Indian newspapers as suggesting that New Zealand didn't believe there was evidence for Canada's position. Now, Winston Peters said he was misreported, and I think you've got to take him at his word on that.
Sam Sachdeva on the diplomatic dance we do when balancing the interests of our friends.
This is the sort of diplomatic areas where things can flare up, right? Canada will probably want us to swing in behind them, or at least offer some sort of support. But if we say something it's taken the wrong way, or if there's a domestic issue here with, Sikh separatists, Sikh activists within the New Zealand community, it could absolutely flow over into trade.
Could you see our government cracking down on the Sikh movement here because of this, with that in the back of their mind, that we don't want to upset India?
A full crackdown, I'm not sure. I have no doubt that our intelligence agencies and police are keeping a close eye on this. I did do a story earlier this year when I heard about the Khalistan referendum that was happening in Auckland. I think police said, look, we're aware of this, we've been talking to the organisers, and that might have been more around crowd management rather than any suggestion of inappropriate activity. But yeah, look, they'll be watching very closely and very alert to it. But at the same time, we have freedom of expression, freedom of speech in New Zealand. We expect people to be allowed to protest on areas like that. And I think any suggestion or request from the Indian government that we somehow clamp down on these groups and stop them from operating, I don't think that would go anywhere fast, because obviously, Sikhs for Justice, I believe, is outlawed in India as a terrorist organisation, and that's how the Indian government views that. But if you look at, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, other Western democracies, they are operating fairly freely, and I don't think we would see a similar response in New Zealand to what has been done in India.
And you can't see the government sort of stepping in and refusing to let Sikhs for Justice leadership in, as they have clamped down on, far-right speakers?
I think there would be a pretty high bar for action. I wouldn't want to say categorically that they wouldn't do that, but the immigration rules in the country are pretty stringent, and, in terms of blocking someone from entry, we have seen that it does happen. There's been a bit of coverage recently about Candace Owens, who's been barred from entry. So, you can use that, but there's, as I say, pretty high bar. You would want to err on the side of caution before stopping people from coming in. But again, it's something to watch closely and see what the New Zealand government does and how the Indian government responds.
I mean, yes, Candace Owens was barred mainly because she's also barred from Australia, which sort of, we take our cue there. But do you think that because the Indian community tends to be more closed in and they tend to stick to using their own languages, that the Sikh situation hasn't bled through to the general public as much as perhaps other situations have?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's certainly not as prominent as other areas, although it's sort of interesting the sort of circles it is gaining prominence or recognition. And I think Bishop Brian Tamaki, his protest against, in favour of only being allowed to fly the New Zealand flag, I believe that one of the offending flags he mentioned was the flag of Khalistan that the Khalistan movement used. So it sort of struck me that had somehow come to his attention as being an area of concern. I suppose it comes down to religious differences given his affiliations, but it's sort of floating up in interesting circles. But I'd say the wider New Zealand public would still know very little about this.
That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. This episode was engineered by Ben Pearce and produced by Gwen McClure. Thanks to Gaurav Sharma and Sam Sachdeva. I'm Alexia Russell. Mā te wā.